Savannah Hale wasn't dressed for luxury. Her apron was stained with wine, her shoes pinched at the toes, and her hair clung to her neck from the heat of the kitchen. But fate never waits for perfection. It arrives in the middle of chaos, hidden in unlikely corners like the one she stood in, just beyond the glare of crystal chandeliers and diamond smiles, watching a world she never belonged to. She was supposed to pass hors d'oeuvres and disappear, a shadow among the opulence of the Whitmore estate, but instead her eyes caught him, Blake Whitmore, not just the heir to a billion-dollar legacy, but a man drowning in a crowd that called his name, yet never knew his soul. He stood like a statue carved in burden, sculpted in elegance, yet suffocating beneath the weight of shallow praise and power-hungry greetings. His ocean blue eyes flicked across the ballroom, as if searching for something more real than champagne bubbles and inherited fame. Savannah's breath caught, not because he was devastatingly handsome, which he was, but because in that one fleeting moment, his gaze crashed into hers and she saw it. The desperate silence in his soul, the loneliness that money couldn't mute. The chandelier lights shimmered above them like stars behind glass, and while laughter roared in the room, it faded around them into a thick hush only they could hear. Savannah didn't think. Somewhere between impulse and instinct, she moved, her hand brushing his sleeve as she whispered three words that would change everything. "Follow me, now." And he did. Without hesitation, without protest, like a boy escaping schoolyard bullies, he followed the stranger who looked at him like a person, not a price tag. She guided him past the marble staircase where his mother once stood, telling him love was weakness, past the gallery of ancestors whose frozen portraits had dictated his every move, down the servants' corridor where laughter was forbidden, and out through the iron kitchen door that creaked like it hadn't opened in years. For freedom always comes at the cost of old hinges. The night air kissed their faces as they stepped into the hidden garden behind the estate, a secret world drenched in moonlight and the scent of wet earth. And in that breathless pause, Savannah turned to him. No name exchange, no small talk, just two broken strangers finding comfort in the quiet. Blake leaned against the stone wall, unbuttoning his collar like shedding years of suffocation, his chest rising with the unfamiliar sensation of peace, while Savannah, arms crossed tightly, said nothing, but her eyes did. For the first time in his life, he wasn't performing. He wasn't a Whitmore. He was just Blake, and it was terrifying and beautiful. She offered him a sip from her water bottle, and he laughed. A real, deep, unfiltered sound that cracked the silence like thunder, surprising even himself. "Why did you help me?" he asked softly, voice rough from years of restraint. "Because you looked like you needed it," she said, her words simple but drenched in truth. A warm breeze passed between them, carrying with it the whisper of a new beginning. They didn't know each other's last names, favorite colors, or scars, but in that moonlit garden, they knew something deeper, a rare kind of honesty that doesn't require explanation. He asked her name finally, and she gave it. Savannah, and it felt like poetry in his mouth. He didn't give his, afraid it would ruin the magic, but promised he would find her again. She smiled, not expecting him to, because promises are cheap in places like this. But something about his eyes told her he meant it. Then a call from the staff inside shattered the moment. The glass walls had cracked, and reality was seeping through. He touched her hand briefly, a silent thank you, an unspoken plea to not forget him, then turned and walked back into the mansion, shoulders a little lighter. Savannah watched him disappear into the golden chaos, heart pounding, unaware that she had just stepped into a story far bigger than she ever imagined. Neither of them knew that their lives had just twisted, that the storm waiting ahead would break and rebuild them, that this small act of kindness would echo into fate, into love, into war, into everything. She returned to the kitchen unnoticed, heart aching for a man she didn't even know, unaware that the next time she saw him, he wouldn't just be another name whispered across a ballroom. He would be the man who shattered her walls and risked everything for her light. As the echo of her footsteps faded back into the mansion's marble silence, the garden remained behind Savannah like a dream, half remembered, but not forgotten. Something sacred had happened there. Something raw, And as she poured coffee the next morning at the diner 2 towns over, wiping down chipped counters and faking smiles for grumpy locals, the memory of him stayed etched behind her eyes, not as a fantasy, but as a presence, haunting and strange, like a song you hear once but can't shake. She didn't know his name, didn't Google him, didn't stalk the social pages where millionaires flex their yachts and charm, but in the quiet moments between orders, she found herself wondering about the man with the storm in his eyes as she began to call him in her mind. A man whose voice was soaked in ache and whose silence spoke louder than any words. A man who had tasted freedom for one breath and disappeared like mist. Those few hours in the moonlit garden had opened something in her chest she thought had long been sealed shut. A tender ache, not for romance, but for connection that wasn't filtered through performance or pretense. And yet real life didn't slow down for wonder. Bills piled up, the leak under her sink worsened, and her manager scolded her for zoning out mid-order. Days passed, then a week. The magic of that night dulled but didn't vanish. It lived under her skin like a secret flame. And then one Monday morning, as rain tapped on the diner's fogged windows and Savannah flipped pancakes for a table of noisy kids, the bell above the door jingled, and in walked a stranger who wasn't a stranger at all. He wore no tuxedo, no tailored suit, just jeans, boots, and a plain black hoodie that clung to him like ink. But his eyes, those storm blue eyes, were unmistakable. And when he smiled, everything inside her stilled. He took the counter seat closest to her, ordered coffee like any other customer, and when she blinked in the stunned disbelief, he simply said, "You saved me that night. Now it's my turn." She almost dropped the pot. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, breath catching. "I looked for you," he admitted. "Didn't even know your last name, but I remembered the logo on the catering van." Her throat tightened. Nobody ever came back for her, not her father, not her ex. But here he was, choosing to find her across the distance of class, wealth, and expectation. He offered no grand gesture, just his presence, and it was enough. They talked, slowly at first, about safe things. Her double shifts, his fake smile at board meetings, her love of old records, his hatred of inherited expectations. But beneath each sentence lay a current neither of them named yet, trust blooming in silence, a rhythm found between mismatched lives. He came back the next day and the one after, always around closing time, sometimes with greasy takeout, sometimes with stories of his latest failed pitch or how his mother wanted him to marry a senator's daughter. And every time he left no number, no last name, only a quiet promise. "See you tomorrow." Savannah didn't dare ask for more, but one evening, as he walked her home under a lavender sky, he told her about his father's funeral. The coldness, the gold, the business card in his pocket before the tears dried. And she, in return, told him about her mom's cancer, how she begged the universe for just one more week and got 3. They spoke of things too deep for daylight, and in the darkness between streetlights, a bond formed not through romance, but through raw, shared survival. Still, not everything was soft. One night, she caught him staring at his phone too long, jaw clenched. "What is it?" she asked. "A shadow," he said, "from a life I'm trying to leave behind." She didn't push, but her gut twisted. Something was coming, and it wasn't gentle. One night he didn't show up, then 2, then a week. She told herself not to care, but when he returned, face bruised, eyes darker than she remembered, everything inside her cracked. "They found out," he whispered, "and they don't like that I've been disappearing." Her heart pounded, not with romance, but with warning. "Who?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "My family. They don't like outsiders." The word hit her like a slap. Suddenly, their quiet world didn't feel so safe. She stared at him, trying to read between the shadows. "What happens now?" she asked. He reached for her hand, trembling slightly, and said, "I don't know, but I'm not letting go." And though she didn't know it yet, that vow would cost them more than either of them was ready to pay. Savannah didn't realize how quickly her life had started shifting until she found herself seated beside Blake on the top floor of a restaurant that had no menu, no prices, only the kind of silence that echoed wealth and loneliness. He looked different under the soft glow of candlelight. The tuxedo traded for rolled-up sleeves and quiet smiles, but his eyes remained the same, blue storms that carried unsaid truths. He would watch her as if memorizing peace, yet always seemed afraid to hold it too long. Their days were filled with soft laughter, museum strolls, and hidden corners of the city he unveiled like secrets just for her. But every time she reached out to pull him closer, he stepped back, slightly carefully, like a man who feared that warmth might burn. Savannah told herself not to hope, yet every shared glance, every near touch, planted roots in her heart. Meanwhile, far from their stolen moments, behind glass walls and hushed meetings, Vivian Whitmore's perfectly manicured world began to fracture with disapproval. She noticed her son smiling more, speaking less of mergers and more of someone. Suspicion lit her like wildfire. Celeste Donovan, all pearls and pedigree, waited obediently in the wings, a girl Vivian had groomed for years to be a Whitmore bride. But Savannah, a waitress from a town with no skyline, a girl with calloused hands and dreams that didn't fit in designer shoes? Unacceptable. Vivian summoned her most loyal staff, men with cameras instead of consciences, and soon had photos, addresses, receipts. Every fragment of Savannah's humble life laid bare in silver-lined folders. She sneered as she read about the diner job, the late rent payments, the small college Savannah dropped out of to care for her ailing grandmother. Too ordinary, Vivian whispered, as if love required a pedigree. Blake, oblivious to the growing conspiracy, continued to carve out quiet pockets of joy for Savannah. He brought her to his favorite rooftop garden, showed her where he used to hide as a boy to escape the pressure, told her stories in between sips of wine and silence. He never spoke of his family, only said that wealth was loud, but happiness was soft, and he preferred the latter when she was near. And Savannah, who had built her life expecting little, began to believe she could have more. Love, maybe even forever. She noticed how his voice softened when he said her name, how his walls lowered just enough for her to glimpse the boy beneath the billionaire. But the closer she stepped, the more she saw it. Those cracks in him, fine and fragile, like porcelain under pressure. He'd flinch when she asked about his childhood, grow quiet when she mentioned the future. He kissed her once beneath the ivy-draped archway of a forgotten park, and the kiss felt like a question he was too afraid to ask out loud. Yet still, Savannah stayed, believing her patience could teach him trust. She didn't know that Vivian had already set her plan in motion. A charity event, a leaked story, a calculated confrontation. She didn't know her name was already being whispered among boardroom wives and polished gossip circles. She didn't see Celeste practicing her smile in the mirror, or the Whitmore driver tailing her cab from the diner to her apartment. She only saw Blake, the man, not the millionaire, and thought maybe, just maybe, this strange, fragile thing between them was becoming real. But fate is rarely gentle with those who fall unknowingly into the passive power. Savannah leaned into Blake one evening, after a quiet dinner, and asked, "What are you most afraid of?" He looked at her for a long moment, something deep flickering in his gaze, and finally whispered, "Losing something I never thought I could have." She smiled, heart aching with a hope she didn't yet fear. In that moment, she didn't know that the glass around them was already beginning to shatter. The fragile hope that had begun to bloom between Blake and Savannah shattered faster than she could have ever imagined, like glass slipping through desperate fingers. Just when Blake felt the weight of his secret pulling at his chest, the truth about the arranged marriage, the cold contract woven into his family's fortune, and the forbidden love blossoming in quiet moments with Savannah, Vivian Whitmore moved her pieces with ruthless precision, a queen striking at the heart of her son's rebellion. One rainy afternoon, Savannah's life was upended by an unmarked envelope slipped under her apartment door, a cruel gift wrapped in deceit. Inside, glossy photographs glared back at her. Blake dining with Celeste Donovan in an intimate setting that had been carefully staged, a secret engagement dinner meant to silence any whispers of scandal. Alongside the pictures was a fabricated article emblazoned with headlines screaming betrayal, Whitmore, heir to wed in billion-dollar deal. Each word stabbed like a jagged knife through her chest, the evidence painting a story that made her world collapse in on itself. She clutched the photos with trembling hands, disbelief and heartbreak warring in her mind, unable to reconcile the man she knew with the image before her. Desperate for answers, Savannah reached for Blake's phone, only to find it switched off, a cruel silence filling the void where his voice should have been. Tears blurred her vision as she recorded a voice message, her words choked by sorrow, a raw mixture of accusation, confusion, and lingering love slipping through the cracks. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you fight for us?" she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of unanswered questions. Days turned to nights with no response, no sign, no explanation. The pain of abandonment was heavier than the truth itself. Consumed by a whirlwind of despair and betrayal, Savannah made a choice she never thought she'd have to. She vanished. She quit her job at the diner, packed her life into a suitcase, and left behind the city, the memories, and the only man who had ever made her feel truly seen. In a new town, under unfamiliar skies, she sought solace in the anonymity of strangers, burying the fragments of her broken heart deep beneath layers of survival and quiet resilience. Meanwhile, Blake returned from a tense business trip, expecting to find Savannah waiting, a light in the dim corners of his existence. Instead, he was met with an empty diner, tables wiped clean, and a lingering scent of loss. His calls went unanswered, his texts unread. The silence was deafening, echoing louder than any argument or confession could. He wandered through the hollow spaces she once filled with laughter and warmth, haunted by the absence of the woman who had been his escape from a gilded cage. Each day without her was a slow unraveling, the quiet ache growing unbearable as he realized how much he had lost in the space between missed calls and unanswered messages. The gulf between them became a vast chasm filled with broken promises, unanswered questions, and the bitter taste of betrayal neither had been ready to face. Yet beneath the wreckage of shattered dreams and bruised hearts, a fragile thread remained, one neither could sever easily, tied by moments too precious to forget and wounds too raw to heal without the other. The painful silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with the weight of what could have been, and the aching hope that, somehow, the pieces might still find a way back together. Months slipped away like scattered leaves on a restless wind, carrying Savannah far from the broken promises and cold shadows of her past. One evening in Boston, the sky opened up in a relentless downpour, washing the city streets with silver rain that mirrored the storm in her heart. Standing alone at a dimly lit street corner, soaked to the bone and trembling from more than just the cold, Savannah felt the weight of every lonely moment settle like a heavy cloak around her shoulders. The world blurred in the streaks of water cascading down the streetlights when suddenly a sleek black car eased beside her, its presence quiet but undeniable. The window rolled down, revealing a familiar face she hadn't dared hope to see again. "Still running from me, Savannah?" Blake's voice was low, gentle, but charged with an emotion that caught her breath and made her heart skip in disbelief. He stepped out of the car, water dripping from his dark hair, his blue eyes searching hers with a desperate intensity. In his hand, a single red rose glistened with raindrops, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. "I searched everywhere," he said, voice trembling with regret and longing, as if the months apart had been a lifetime of silent agony. Savannah's knees weakened, rain mingling with the tears she had tried so hard to hide, blurring the line between sorrow and hope. "You were engaged," she whispered, voice barely audible over the rain's relentless rhythm. "I saw the photos." His eyes darkened with pain as he stepped closer, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "They lied. My mother, she framed it all. I tried to tell you, Savannah, but no one listens when it's family against family. I walked away from everything. The money, the board, the empire I was supposed to inherit. You were all I ever wanted." The raw honesty in his words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, melting the ice of betrayal that had frozen her heart. Together they sought refuge in a small nearby bookstore, the scent of aged paper and rain-soaked wood enveloping them in a world untouched by lies or deceit. Hours passed as they poured out their truths, fears, and dreams in whispered conversations, their souls reconnecting beneath the quiet watch of ancient stories and forgotten poems. There was no pretense, no facade, only two broken people finding pieces of themselves in each other's company. When Blake gently pressed his lips to her forehead, it was a silent promise of protection, healing, and unwavering devotion. Then, with a tenderness that stripped away every fear and doubt, he kissed her lips, soft, honest, and profound, like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. It wasn't passion born of fleeting desire, but a deep, soul-stirring connection that whispered of forever. In that stolen moment beneath the rain and the rose, Savannah and Blake discovered that love, when true and fearless, could conquer even the most relentless storms, healing wounds no time nor distance could erase. The warmth of their kiss in the bookstore lingered into the night, trailing like a secret flame between their hearts. And when Blake walked Savannah home under the dim glow of street lamps, their fingers brushed and held, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might demand. The next morning, the world outside buzzed on, unaware that two souls had begun to heal in the quiet. Blake sold his penthouse, withdrew from the Whitmore estate, and bought a modest cottage on the edge of a sleepy town where no one whispered about legacies or fortunes, just wild gardens, winding roads, and the hum of simplicity. The cottage was old, with ivy climbing the bricks and shutters that creaked when the wind blew. But to Savannah, it was beautiful, and to Blake, it was freedom. They painted the walls together, fought over colors, laughed at smudges on their noses, and ended each day tangled in each other's arms, hearts light and raw from peeling back the layers of their haunted past. Blake swapped tailored suits for flannel shirts, read novels out loud to her every night, and learned to burn toast just as badly as she did. Savannah danced barefoot in the kitchen, her laughter brighter than any chandelier, her happiness no longer caged. He built her a garden where she planted lavender, daisies, and forget-me-nots, delicate things like the dreams she once gave up on. But peace, like glass, is fragile. It wasn't long before the world they left behind came crashing through. A black SUV pulled into their gravel driveway one morning, and a man in a sharp suit handed Blake an envelope. Inside, Vivian's legal papers, a lawsuit. She was trying to declare him mentally unfit, demanding financial guardianship over her son, claiming he had been compromised by a manipulative woman from a lesser world. And that was just the beginning. Tabloids erupted with headlines calling Savannah a small-town temptress, painting her as a gold digger who'd cast a spell over the Whitmore air. Old photos of Blake and Celeste were dug up, twisted into false timelines, while Savannah's diner past was mocked across gossip columns. Blake's former friends went silent, investors backed away, and Vivian pulled strings in every direction, hoping to tighten the noose. Reporters staked out the cottage. Drones buzzed overhead. Even their mailbox was broken into. Savannah tried to stay strong, but the cracks began to show. Sleepless nights, trembling hands, tears she pretended were about onions. Maybe I wasn't built for your world, she whispered one night, curled beside him. But Blake cupped her face, looked her in the eye, and said, "Then let's burn my world down and build a new one. Just ours." And the next morning, he did. Blake scheduled a press conference, not from a luxury hotel, but on the steps of a public library downtown. He wore no suit, just jeans and a sweater. 1,000 microphones stood ready to twist his truth, but his voice cut through like thunder. My mother believes wealth should be inherited, not shared. That love should be strategic, not sincere. But I walked away from her name, her empire, her conditions. Because the only legacy I want to leave behind is this. If loving someone without a title is madness, then call me mad. Because this woman beside me saved me from a prison lined with gold. The room fell still. A single clap broke it, then more, and then a roar. But even with public sentiment turning, Vivian's claws dug deeper. She threatened countersuits, dragged Savannah's name through boardrooms, and pushed for court-ordered evaluations. But Savannah refused to crumble. She began writing, pages filled with their truth. Not a scandal memoir, but a love story born in shadow and tested in fire. She titled it Ghosts and Grace, because that's what they lived, haunted by the past, yet moving forward with dignity. At night, Blake would read her drafts, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, always holding her hand. "You make pain beautiful," he told her once, voice breaking. Meanwhile, the garden behind the cottage began to bloom, wild and untamed, just like them. Lavender, their favorite, stretched tall under the sun. Neighbors, once strangers, began dropping off cookies, books, and quiet words of support. The town protected them more fiercely than any gated estate ever had. One evening, after another meeting with lawyers, Savannah collapsed into Blake's chest and whispered, "If we survive this, promise me we'll never go back." Blake kissed her hair and replied, "There's nothing to go back to. You are my future now." And in that soft moment, where legal threats and media storms fell away, two souls scarred by legacy and loss found something stronger than either had ever known. Peace, not because the world allowed it, but because they claimed it with bare hands and broken hearts. And in that little cottage where ghosts still lingered, grace bloomed, line by line, day by day. The warmth of their kiss in the bookstore lingered into the night, trailing like a secret flame between their hearts. And when Blake walked Savannah home, under the dim glow of street lamps, their fingers brushed and held, no longer afraid of what tomorrow might demand. The next morning, the world outside buzzed on, unaware that two souls had begun to heal in the quiet. Blake sold his penthouse, withdrew from the Whitmore estate, and bought a modest cottage on the edge of a sleepy town where no one whispered about legacies or fortunes, just wild gardens, winding roads, and the hum of simplicity. The cottage was old, with ivy climbing the bricks and shutters that creaked when the wind blew. But to Savannah, it was beautiful, and to Blake, it was freedom. They painted the walls together, fought over colors, laughed at smudges on their noses, and ended each day tangled in each other's arms, hearts light and raw from peeling back the layers of their haunted pasts. Blake swapped tailored suits for flannel shirts, read novels out loud to her every night, and learned to burn toast just as badly as she did. Savannah danced barefoot in the kitchen, her laughter brighter than any chandelier, her happiness no longer caged. He built her a garden where she planted lavender, daisies, and forget-me-nots, delicate things like the dreams she once gave up on. But peace, like glass, is fragile. It wasn't long before the world they left behind came crashing through. A black SUV pulled into their gravel driveway one morning, and a man in a sharp suit handed Blake an envelope. Inside, Vivian's legal papers, a lawsuit. She was trying to declare him mentally unfit, demanding financial guardianship over her son, claiming he had been compromised by a manipulative woman from a lesser world. And that was just the beginning. Tabloids erupted with headlines calling Savannah a small-town temptress, painting her as a gold digger who'd cast a spell over the Whitmore air. Old photos of Blake and Celeste were dug up, twisted into false timelines, while Savannah's diner pass was mocked across gossip columns. Blake's former friends went silent, investors backed away, and Vivian pulled strings in every direction, hoping to tighten the noose. Reporters staked out the cottage. Drones buzzed overhead. Even their mailbox was broken into. Savannah tried to stay strong, but the cracks began to show. Sleepless nights, trembling hands, tears she pretended were about onions. Maybe I wasn't built for your world," she whispered one night, curled beside him. But Blake cupped her face, looked her in the eye and said, "Then let's burn my world down and build a new one. Just ours." And the next morning, he did. Blake scheduled a press conference, not from a luxury hotel, but on the steps of a public library downtown. He wore no suit, just jeans and a sweater. 1,000 microphones stood ready to twist his truth, but his voice cut through like thunder. "My mother believes wealth should be inherited, not shared. That love should be strategic, not sincere. But I walked away from her name, her empire, her conditions, because the only legacy I want to leave behind is this. If loving someone without a title is madness, then call me mad, because this woman beside me saved me from a prison lined with gold." The room fell still. A single clap broke it, then more, and then a roar. But even with public sentiment turning, Vivian's claws dug deeper. She threatened countersuits, dragged Savannah's name through boardrooms, and pushed for court-ordered evaluations. But Savannah refused to crumble. She began writing, pages filled with their truth. Not a scandal memoir, but a love story born in shadow and tested in fire. She titled it Ghosts and Grace, because that's what they lived, haunted by the past, yet moving forward with dignity. At night, Blake would read her drafts, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, always holding her hand. "You make pain beautiful," he told her once, voice breaking. Meanwhile, the garden behind the cottage began to bloom, wild and untamed, just like them. Lavender, their favorite, stretched tall under the sun. Neighbors, once strangers, began dropping off cookies, books, and quiet words of support. The town protected them more fiercely than any gated estate ever had. One evening, after another meeting with lawyers, Savannah collapsed into Blake's chest and whispered, "If we survive this, promise me we'll never go back." Blake kissed her hair and replied, "There's nothing to go back to. You are my future now." And in that soft moment, where legal threats and media storms fell away, two souls scarred by legacy and loss found something stronger than either had ever known: peace, not because the world allowed it, but because they claimed it with bare hands and broken hearts. And in that little cottage where ghosts still lingered, grace bloomed. Line by line, day by day, the world had tried to break them. Money, lies, legacy, the claws of a mother unwilling to let go. But a year later, the only sound that mattered was the soft rustle of wildflowers under Savannah's bare feet as she walked toward Blake, the man who had once been a headline, but was now simply hers. The field was quiet, save for the gentle hum of lanterns swaying in the summer breeze, casting golden light over friends who had become family and strangers who now believed in love again. And as Savannah moved slowly down the aisle in her simple, flowing white gown, no jewels, no veil, no cathedral, but the open sky, Blake's hands trembled, not from nerves, but from awe. For in that moment, she was everything he had searched for in chaos and found only in silence. His eyes glistened with tears that refused to fall, because pride held them captive. Not ego, but reverence. And when she reached him, he took her hands like they were the last fragile pieces of the world he was finally strong enough to protect. The minister spoke, but neither of them really heard. Their hearts were too loud, too full, beating in time with every memory that had brought them here. The quiet garden escape, the rainy night reunion, the war with bloodlines and bitterness, the tiny cottage that held their laughter like it was gold. And when Savannah whispered her vow, her voice barely louder than the wind, the field seemed to pause, the earth itself listening. "You were my storm, Blake, but also my shelter," she said. And the honesty in her words made a few guests dab at their eyes, though no one sobbed louder than Blake's childhood housekeeper, who had once told him love like this didn't exist in Whitmore blood. Blake's vow came like a vow to the sky itself, spoken with the kind of vulnerability only a man who's lost everything and still chosen love could find. "And you, Savannah, were the one soul who saw the man behind the millions." And then he leaned in, slow, deliberate, not for show, but because kissing her was still the only moment he ever felt truly whole. Their lips met just as the first firework bloomed above, not arranged by a planner, but a surprise gift from Savannah's old diner crew, now their unofficial family. And as the sky exploded in color, laughter echoed through the field. Not rehearsed, not perfect, just real, raw and messy and unforgettable. Children danced barefoot between wildflowers. Couples held hands as if love was contagious. And Blake's best friend Miles read poetry by a bonfire they built together just that morning. There were no white-gloved waiters, just a table full of home-cooked food, the smell of cinnamon and rosemary swirling in the air. And when the music started, it wasn't an orchestra, but a single guitar played by Savannah's brother, the same man who once doubted her strength but now called her his hero. They danced under stars older than empires, their bodies close, hearts closer, whispering things only they could hear. Promises, forgiveness, forever. And when Blake twirled her, she laughed that same laugh that first cracked his armor back in the kitchen corridor of the Whitmore estate. There were no speeches for show, only stories, Toasts about battles survived, dreams resurrected, love reborn in defiance of legacy, and as the night deepened and the fire burned low, Savannah sat beside Blake on an old quilt, her head on his shoulder, his fingers tangled in her hair, both of them watching the sky as if it had given them permission to finally breathe. And just before midnight, when the lanterns flickered and guests dozed off beneath the stars, Blake kissed her hand and said, "I don't want a future unless it's slow and sacred like this." And she smiled, eyes soft, saying, "Then let's build a life where silence is safe and love is loud without shouting." And they stayed like that, quiet, barefoot, infinite, not needing applause, just the warmth of each other. Proof that sometimes love doesn't roar into your life with diamond rings and press releases, but sneaks in softly through broken doors and handwritten notes, building itself in the ruins and rising until it's no longer just a feeling, but everything you are and everything you'll ever be, together.